One of the weirdest decisions I find myself making in video games is choosing when to walk instead of running. It's weird because nowadays walking is considered a pretty basic requirement in gaming, yet it also has the potential to completely change how an individual will experience the game. As an individual myself, when I choose to walk, I might end up having the most immersive experience I never thought possible, but even more than that, I find that simply choosing to go for a walk can also benefit my own mental health. But before that, I want to talk about how immersive choosing to walk over running can truly be, and one of the ways I do this is by walking to match the vibe and atmosphere of the world around me. To explain from my perspective, sometimes when I'm running around a city or something smaller like a village or hideout, I'll sometimes become extremely aware of the fact that I am the only person sprinting around, to the point where if I was looking at myself from an outside perspective, I'd be like, that guy has to be a crackhead. Now, there are so many games where this applies, but the first game that comes to my mind is Cyberpunk, and that's because it specifically has an extremely immersive open world with a lot of people that are just walking around, kinda chilling, munching on food, but then there's me who's doing this. And while I love the freedom of being able to move around like this, especially so I can save time, I can't help but sometimes think, man, I must look ridiculous. And because of this thought, I will sometimes make a conscious effort to walk around alongside everyone else just so it feels more real, because realistically, if I was actually in this world, I'd probably be walking around too. Sometimes I'll even end up making quest-giving NPCs look like crackheads, because in some of these games, when I'm required to follow them somewhere, I can control their pace by running and walking, and having a casual conversation while sprinting kinda gives me crackhead vibes. It's just one of those things where walking really fits the atmosphere of what's going on at the time. To go a little bit deeper though, what's even cooler about this particular concept is it doesn't just have to be so you feel more in tune with the world around you. You can also do it so you feel more in tune with the character you are playing as. Role-playing games like Cyberpunk are great for this because quite literally you're playing a role with your own character. This can be shown in a variety of ways like dialogue choices or fashion choices, but also walking choices. For example, whenever I play Cyberpunk, I like to think of myself as someone who is quite calm and collected and doesn't make irrational decisions. I also feel like in order to play this role, darting around like a crackhead or approaching someone at high speed doesn't really fit the vibe of calm and collected. So instead, I choose to walk in a way that represents the character I'm playing as. The awesome thing with this though is walking doesn't just have to apply to role-playing games, it can also apply to more narrative-driven games where you play as a particular character. The first games that come to mind in regards to this are the Uncharted series, and in those games you play as Nathan Drake, who is basically a very enthusiastic professional treasure hunter that explores various ancient tombs throughout the game. Now, when you explore those tombs, you can usually just run straight through them to the main objective, and while there is nothing wrong with doing this, I always felt this was kinda strange and it doesn't fit what Nathan Drake would actually do. Because if I was a treasure hunter that enjoyed exploring tombs, I'd probably take my time, be in awe of the tomb, and actually explore the tomb. So for a start, to me it literally just makes sense, but more than that, I found walking to be a great way to add to the feeling of actually being Nathan Drake, and I don't think I will ever stop. So what I just showed you were examples of walking to match the vibe, but what if you wanted to walk in order to change or maybe even better the vibe? Well, there are definitely ways to do this, and the best example I can think of is with boss fights. And when we're talking about boss fights, the all-time goats of making these, the FromSoft games and even Black Myth Wukong, have to be mentioned. Now, in these games, when you encounter a boss, you can just run it straight, balls deep into them and get the fight started. But have you ever taken your time and just walked towards or even around the boss? Kinda like how two badass characters in an anime would right before they throw hands? Well, whatever your answer is, I do this all the time, and it's such a great way to build tension right before the fight starts, almost like you're sizing up the boss right before you engage. And what's even cooler about this is the boss will sometimes also engage in this walk, almost like they're sizing you up too. Black Myth Wukong is probably the best example of this because I swear the developers put in an active effort to make bosses respond to your character whenever they see you walk. I actually experienced something spectacular in regards to this with the Golden Rhino boss fight, and it basically blew my mind and hopefully yours too. So in this fight, the rhino was charging at me from a distance with full speed, but instead of running out of the way like I normally would, I decided to fearlessly walk towards the rhino, and when I did this, the rhino stopped charging and walked right up to me, almost as if to say, "I've got balls too." And I gotta say, I cannot believe this happened because it completely changed how the fight felt, almost like it felt more real. Anyway, now for something maybe a bit less real, how about those moments when you walk just so you can take in the view? Kinda like how you would in real life, except if I'm being honest, some of the views you see in video games are arguably better than what you would ever see in real life. But either way, whether it's real or not, I always found it felt wrong that if I was presented with a gorgeous view, I would just run past it without taking it in at all. To add to this, I also think to myself, someone out there actually put in the effort to design something so wonderful, so at the very least I could appreciate it. Now there are countless games where the views are amazing. I think both of the Horizon games, Red Dead Redemption 2, and even a linear game like Plague Tale are some of the great quick examples I can think of, but the one that stuck out for me recently and actually helped the idea for this video was Elden Ring's DLC. The reason it stood out was because I was presented throughout the game basically non-stop with gorgeous views and color schemes at every instance where a new area or even small dungeon was being introduced. I eventually got into this habit of purposefully walking in or out of the new area being presented just so I could make it feel more epic and take it all in. And just to give you an idea, right now I'm going to show you the difference between me entering a dungeon and taking it in versus me not taking it in at all. Hopefully you feel the point I'm trying to make, because otherwise I'm gonna look a bit stupid, but the way it feels for me is if I didn't take it in, I wouldn't be able to acknowledge just how massive this dungeon is, and being able to see how grand it is changes how it feels as I continue to explore it. Either way though, these moments I'm talking about are exactly why I have my camera tilted in a certain direction and my thumb lightly pushing on the analog stick. I won't be the first person to say this, but I have my sad days and sometimes my anxious days too, and one of the things that I have found that really helps with these days is just chucking on some headphones, opening up a game, usually open world, and simply going for a walk. It's honestly kind of therapeutic, and I swear some games are just made for this. One of those is The Witcher 3, and I swear there is something seriously special about walking around in that game. I think it's one of those games where the combination of atmospheric music and really good environmental sound effects all comes together to completely match the vibe of whatever is going on around you in the game. It feels so immersive to the point where you can imagine yourself as Geralt and completely forget the real world around you. Hopefully I don't sound weird for saying this, but I'm actually at the point in that game where before I go for that walk, I will already have picked out my favorite areas to walk around in. I will even purposefully meditate so that it changes the time and weather within the game, almost so it suits the mood that I'm in. Now in regards to this, my personal go-to, which might sound depressing, is pitch black nighttime with a shitload of rain, maybe even a storm, but the thing is I don't find it depressing. I actually find it incredibly relaxing. It's sort of like the nostalgic moments you get where you lie in bed listening to the rain at night. What I can definitely say though is because I find it so relaxing, it gives me the opportunity to just chill out, but it also lets me internalize my own thoughts, where if I didn't have games like The Witcher to walk around in, I might not have the opportunity to do so. Hopefully I'm not alone in doing this kind of stuff, but if I am and you're even slightly considering it, I highly recommend it. Taking a break from the deep and more emotional stuff, going for these long walks obviously doesn't just have to be for something like that. It could also be for something far more simple like walking from point A to B without fast traveling because you just want a more immersive experience. This is something I have also found myself doing for years, but first I gotta say, I am not a psychopath that will walk from one end of the map to the other for the sake of immersion, because for one, fuck that, it's too far, and two, I love being able to save time by sprinting, gliding, or even driving. And honestly, in games like Red Dead Redemption 2 and Cyberpunk, you still get that same immersive feeling while riding a horse or driving a car anyway. But for some strange reason, I will still only choose that option if I have an extremely long distance to go. Otherwise, I'm completely fine mixing it up with a bit of running and walking. And besides, if you do decide to take your time and walk, you'll probably come across a lot of content you never would have if you boosted on by or even fast traveled. This is kinda weird, but again, if you're like me, you'll even start to notice really specific things like how detailed the walking animations are for your characters. For example, how cool is it that in Ghost of Tsushima, Jin puts his hand out to touch the grass? I also noticed Geralt has quite the swaggy walk with how he moves that shoulder. I love this kind of stuff because it feels so real, and again, I don't know if I would have noticed this stuff without walking. So if you've made it this far, I think we can all agree just how amazing walking in games actually is. But have you ever considered how even more amazing it will be in the future? My brother and best friend actually gave me the idea for this, and he was like, imagine what it will be like to walk around in something like the movie Ready Player One. And I swear I nearly busted an orange thinking about it because that would have kind of been a dream come true. It also made me realize that walking in games is sort of only a modern thing because it clearly isn't just about the walking, it's also about the music, the sound effects, and even the graphics, and these are all things that get better as gaming gets better over time. Now that I think about it, I don't really think I've walked around that much in games back in the PS2 days, but maybe that's also because I never felt the need to decompress as a child compared to me now, a full-fledged dad. It's also funny because I would never think this much about walking in real life, but I guess that just shows how much of a gamer nerd I truly am. But also how important being able to freely walk in video games actually is. So that's it, thank you for walking and talking with me, have a good one, and I hope this video made you go yeah!